The security guard's grip tightened on Marcus's shoulder, pushing the black janitor and his daughter toward the door. Mocking laughter echoed through the boardroom. "Don't let them waste our $50 million time." But suddenly, 8-year-old Amara twisted free from her father's grasp, her voice cutting through the tension. "I can help. Let me try." The room froze. With fierce pride in her eyes, she lifted her chin and spoke in flawless Arabic, each word perfectly pronounced. Sheikh Khalid sat stunned. The executives fell silent, and Marcus simply smiled, the quiet, proud smile of a father watching his daughter shatter every assumption in the room. Marcus Johnson had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility in the towers of Sterling Industries. Each night, he arrived when the city was still dark, pushing his cart through empty hallways that would soon fill with people who looked through him as if he were made of glass. At 38, his hands told the story of his life, scarred from industrial cleaners, calloused from endless mopping, steady despite everything they'd lost grip on over the years. The navy blue uniform he wore had become a second skin, marking him as essential yet insignificant. Necessary, but never noticed. The truth was, Marcus had once walked these same corporate hallways with different dreams. Not as a janitor, but as a young man with a gift for languages and a scholarship to Columbia University. He could still remember the weight of Arabic words on his tongue, the elegant logic of Semitic grammar, the way Persian poetry felt like music when properly translated. His professors had called him exceptional, a natural linguist who could hear the subtle differences between Levantine and Gulf Arabic, who understood that translation was about culture as much as vocabulary. But that was before life had taught him that talent without money was like a car without fuel. Impressive to look at, but ultimately going nowhere. Keisha had been the one who believed he could have it all. They'd met when he was 25, at a community center in Harlem, where he was volunteering as a translator for new immigrants. She was running a voter registration drive, fierce and beautiful in her determination to change the world one ballot at a time. She had this laugh that started deep in her belly and erupted like joy itself. And when she looked at him, he felt seen in a way that transcended visibility. She was studying to be a nurse, working 2 jobs while taking night classes, and together they built dreams on the foundation of their shared exhaustion. When Amara was born, Keisha had held their daughter up to the light streaming through the hospital window and declared, "She's going to have everything we didn't." Marcus had believed her then, believed in the power of their combined will to forge a different path for their child. They moved to a bigger apartment, started a college fund with $20 a month, bought books instead of toys. Keisha would work the early shift at the hospital while Marcus attended classes. Then they'd switch, him working as a night security guard while she studied for her nursing exams. The cancer diagnosis came when Amara was 3. Acute myeloid leukemia, the doctor had said. The words falling like stones into still water, sending ripples through every plan they'd made. The next 18 months became a blur of hospital rooms, treatment protocols, insurance battles, and the slow, terrible realization that love alone couldn't save someone. Keisha fought with the same ferocity she'd brought to everything else, but cancer didn't care about determination. She died on a Tuesday morning in April, holding Marcus's hand and making him promise that Amara would still have everything they'd dreamed. The medical bills totaled more than Marcus could make in 5 years. The scholarship to Columbia became an impossible luxury when weighted against the immediate needs of keeping a roof over their heads. He dropped out one course at a time, each withdrawal form feeling like another door closing. The overnight janitor position at Sterling Industries paid $17 an hour plus benefits enough to keep their apartment in the Bronx, to keep the lights on, to keep Amara in school. Pride became something he could no longer afford. Dignity, something he rationed like their grocery budget. But Amara had inherited more than just her mother's eyes and her father's careful way of listening. She had something neither parent could fully explain: a mind that absorbed languages the way plants absorb sunlight, naturally and necessarily. Marcus first noticed it when she was 4, correcting his pronunciation of a Spanish word their neighbor had used. By 5, she was having full conversations with the Dominican family next door, her accent so perfect that strangers assumed she'd been raised bilingual. The discovery of her gift had been accidental, born from boredom and the blessed abundance of the New York Public Library. Marcus would take her there on his days off, parking her in the children's section while he looked for job listings on the computers. But Amara would inevitably wander, drawn to sections far beyond her supposed reading level. She'd found a book of French fairy tales with parallel text translations, and within a month she was reading both versions with equal ease. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, had started bringing her more challenging materials: German poetry, Italian newspapers, Japanese manga with furigana helpers. By 6, Amara's world had become polyglot. She learned Mandarin from Mr. Liu at the corner store, who was delighted to find a young black girl who could discuss the subtle differences between Beijing and Shanghai dialects. Arabic came from the halal food vendor who gave her extra rice and lessons in Egyptian colloquialisms. Russian emerged from conversations with Dmitri, the night janitor at her school who'd been a literature professor in Moscow before immigration had reset his life to zero. Portuguese flowed from the Brazilian soap operas. Their upstairs neighbor watched at volumes that penetrated the thin apartment walls. At Sterling Industries, the $50 million acquisition of Khalid Enterprises had been in negotiation for 6 months. Isabella Sterling had orchestrated every detail, from the initial approach to the final terms. At 34, she was the youngest CEO in the company's history, a fact that she wore like armor against those who questioned her authority. Harvard Business School at 22, McKinsey consultant at 24, Colorado O at 30, CEO at 32. Her resume read like a capitalist fairy tale, each achievement building toward an inevitable coronation. The conference room where the final negotiations were taking place had been designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that made visitors feel simultaneously powerful and small. The mahogany table could seat 20, but was arranged for 12, creating a sense of spaciousness that subtly emphasized Sterling Industries' resources. Isabella sat at the head, her white silk blouse and charcoal suit chosen to project authority without ostentation. She'd learned early that power dressed in understated tones, that true influence whispered rather than shouted. Sheikh Khalid represented everything Isabella had been trained to acquire Middle Eastern oil money, looking for Western investment opportunities. Traditional wealth, seeking modern returns. He was 45, educated at Oxford, equally comfortable discussing Rumi's poetry or derivatives markets. But he was also proudly, uncompromisingly Arab, quick to detect and punish any hint of cultural disrespect. The deal balanced on a knife's edge of mutual need and mutual suspicion. The problem had started with the translator Sterling Industries had hired, a white academic with impressive credentials but tin-ear pronunciation. Every mistake, and there had been many, had caused Sheikh Khalid's expression to harden a fraction more. Isabella could feel the deal slipping away with each mangled Arabic phrase, each culturally tone-deaf translation. $50 million dissolving into the air because someone had confused formal and informal address, had used Egyptian slang with a Gulf Arab businessman, had fundamentally failed to understand that language was never just about words. Marcus had been emptying the wastebaskets when the latest translation crisis erupted. He moved through the room with practiced invisibility, trained to clean around conversations worth more than he'd make in several lifetimes. Amara sat in the corner, having accompanied him to work because their regular babysitter was sick and school was closed for professional development. She had a worn copy of 1001 Nights in Arabic, a library find that she'd been slowly working through. Dictionary at her side. The translator was struggling with a particular phrase, something about water rights and ancestral claims that required understanding both classical Arabic and contemporary legal terminology. Sheikh Khalid's frustration was palpable, his fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm that seemed to count down to the deal's demise. Isabella watched her carefully constructed acquisition crumble in real time, her jaw tight with the effort of maintaining composure. That's when Amara looked up from her book. Her young ears, trained by countless hours of Arabic conversation with Muhammad the food vendor, Fatima from the mosque's weekend school, and her own careful study, immediately caught the translator's error. It wasn't just wrong, it was offensively wrong, turning a respectful inquiry into what sounded like an accusation. Without thinking, she murmured the correct translation under her breath, the words flowing with the natural cadence of someone who understood not just the language, but its music. Marcus heard his daughter's whisper and felt his blood turn cold. He knew that sound Amara's unconscious correction of adult error, usually followed by trouble. He moved toward her quickly, ready to usher her out before anyone noticed. But it was too late. Sheikh Khalid's head had turned. his eyes finding the small black girl in the corner with laser precision. "What did you say?" he asked in Arabic, his tone more curious than angry. The security guard was already moving. Sterling Industries protocol clear about unauthorized persons in sensitive meetings. His hand fell on Marcus's shoulder, firmly directing him toward the door. "Come on, folks. You need to leave. Now." The executives around the table barely looked up. Accustomed to the sight of service workers being managed, controlled, removed when they became inconvenient. Someone laughed a sharp, dismissive sound. "Don't let them waste our $50 million time." The words carried the casual cruelty of those who'd never had to calculate whether they could afford both rent and groceries in the same month. Another executive muttered something about security protocols, about what kind of company allowed janitors to bring their children to work. The contempt was thick enough to choke on. Marcus felt the familiar burn of humiliation, the weight of being seen only as a problem to be solved, a disruption to be eliminated. He reached for Amara's hand, ready to leave with whatever dignity remained. But his daughter, his brilliant, fearless daughter, had inherited her mother's refusal to be silenced alongside her linguistic gifts. She twisted away from his protective grasp with surprising strength, stepping into the center of the room before anyone could stop her. "I can help." The words rang out clear and forceful, delivered with the authority of someone who knew their worth even if no one else did. "Let me try." The room froze. Executives who managed billions seemed suddenly unsure how to handle one determined 8-year-old. The security guard hesitated, unclear on the protocol for removing a child who wasn't going quietly. Isabella Sterling half rose from her chair, caught between maintaining order and curiosity about what this unexpected interruption might yield. Amara didn't wait for permission. She turned to Sheikh Khalid and began to speak in Arabic. Not the stilted textbook Arabic the translator had been fumbling with, but the flowing, respectful, culturally nuanced Arabic she'd learned from hours of conversation and study. She repeated what he'd actually said, then provided what the translator had communicated, explaining where the misunderstanding had occurred. Her pronunciation was flawless, her grammar perfect. Her understanding of cultural context far beyond her years. Sheikh Khalid's expression transformed from frustration to astonishment. He responded in rapid Arabic, testing her with a complex financial term. Amara not only understood, but offered 2 different ways to translate it depending on the legal context. He tried again, this time with a colloquial expression from his native Kuwait. She caught it immediately, even making a small joke that referenced a famous Kuwaiti television show that made him actually smile. The boardroom had become utterly silent, except for the exchange between the middle-aged Arab businessman and the young black girl. The executives stared, unable to process what they were witnessing. The translator sat frozen, his face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been anger at being shown up by a child. Isabella Sterling watched with an expression that cycled through surprise, calculation, and something approaching respect. Marcus stood near the door, the security guard's hand still on his shoulder but forgotten now. He watched his daughter command the room with the same quiet confidence her mother had possessed, and felt tears threaten at the corners of his eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of pride so fierce it actually hurt. This was what Keisha had dreamed of their daughter, refusing to be limited by others' expectations, refusing to be made small by a world that wanted to overlook her. Sheikh Khalid turned to Isabella. "Where did you find this young translator?" he asked in English, his tone warming considerably. "She's not." Isabella began, then stopped, reassessing the situation with the rapid calculation that had made her CEO. "She's a new addition to our team," she said smoothly, ignoring the shocked looks from her board members. "She's my daughter," Marcus said quietly but firmly from his position by the door. "I'm the janitor here. She's just visiting because her school is closed." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The board members exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their thoughts on Janitor's children inserting themselves into executive negotiations. One of them, a silver-haired man named Harrison, who'd never acknowledged Marcus's existence in 3 years, stood up. "This is highly inappropriate," Harrison declared, his voice dripping with indignation. "We cannot have a child, especially," he paused, his eyes flicking over Amara's skin color, her carefully braided hair, her second-hand clothes, leaving the rest of his sentence unspoken but thunderously clear. We need professional translation. The liability alone, the child speaks better Arabic than anyone else in this room. Sheikh Khalid interrupted, his tone carrying a warning, including the professional translator you hired, who has been insulting my intelligence for the past hour with his incompetence. Isabella stood slowly, her mind racing through possibilities, calculating risks and rewards with the speed that had brought her to this position. The safe choice would be to apologize, remove the child, hire a new translator, and hope Sheikh Khalid's mood improved. The safe choice would protect her from board criticism, from questions about protocol, from the chaos of coloring outside carefully drawn corporate lines. But Isabella Sterling hadn't become the youngest CEO in company history by making safe choices. Amara, she said, addressing the child directly for the first time. Would you be willing to help us complete this negotiation? The board erupted. Harrison's face turned an alarming shade of red. You cannot seriously be suggesting we trust a $50 million deal to an 8-year-old child. The shareholders want this deal closed. Isabella cut him off coldly. And right now, this 8-year-old child is the only person in this room Sheikh Khalid trusts to translate accurately. She's absolutely right. Sheikh Khalid interjected, switching back to Arabic to address Amara directly. Young lady, I will make you a deal. If you can translate for the rest of this meeting, I will personally ensure you receive compensation appropriate to the service you're providing. And perhaps we can discuss your future education. A mind like yours should have every opportunity to flourish. Amara translated his words for the room, her young voice steady despite the weight of adult attention focused on her. Then she looked at her father, seeking the permission that mattered more than any CEOs or sheikhs. Marcus moved forward, the security guard's hand falling away as he stepped into the light of the boardroom's center. For the first time in 3 years of working in this building, he was truly visible. Are you sure you want to do this, baby girl? He asked softly, using the pet name he'd called her since she was born. Yes, Daddy, she replied, her voice carrying her mother's determination. I can do this. Marcus nodded, then turned to Isabella. If she's going to translate, I stay in the room. It wasn't a request. Harrison practically spluttered. The janitor doesn't get to make demands. The janitor, Isabella said with steel in her voice, is the father of the only person who can save this deal. He stays. She turned to Marcus. Please, Mr. Johnson, have a seat. And so, Marcus Johnson, who'd cleaned these rooms in invisible silence for 3 years, sat at the mahogany table where deals worth more than entire neighborhoods were decided. His daughter stood beside Sheikh Khalid, her small form dwarfed by the corporate giants around her, but her presence filling the room. The negotiation resumed, but this time with a radical difference. Amara didn't just translate words, she translated meaning, culture, intention. When Sheikh Khalid used a metaphor about desert wells that the Americans didn't understand, she explained the cultural context. When the Sterling Industries lawyer made a point about intellectual property, she found an Arabic equivalent that preserved both legal precision and cultural respect. More importantly, she began to identify where previous miscommunications had created false conflicts. Several sticking points in the negotiation turned out to be misunderstandings rather than genuine disagreements. An issue about payment schedules that had seemed intractable dissolved when Amara explained that the Arabic word Sheikh Khalid had been using implied flexibility, not the rigid demand the previous translator had communicated. Sheikh Khalid began addressing his comments directly to Amara, occasionally asking her opinion on how best to phrase something for American understanding. She would consider carefully, sometimes asking her father for advice in whispered English, before offering suggestions that invariably smoothed the path forward. The board members watched in stunned silence as their $50 million deal was salvaged by a child they would have stepped over in the street without a second glance. Harrison's face had progressed from red to purple to a kind of ashen gray as he realized his objections were being thoroughly ignored. The original translator had slunk out at some point, his departure unnoticed and unmourned. Isabella observed it all with growing fascination. She'd built her career on recognizing talent and leveraging it. but she'd never imagined finding it in this form. The child's intelligence was obvious, but it was her composure that was truly remarkable. She showed no signs of intimidation, no anxiety about being surrounded by adults who could buy and sell entire city blocks. She simply did the work with quiet competence, occasionally smiling at her father when she caught his eye. As the hours passed, something shifted in the room's dynamics. The initial shock gave way to grudging respect. Then, genuine admiration. Even Harrison had stopped spluttering objections, watching instead with the expression of a man recalculating fundamental assumptions. The breakthrough came when Amara noticed a discrepancy in the contract's Arabic version that no one else had caught a single word that changed a mutual agreement into a unilateral concession. She pointed it out to Sheikh Khalid, who immediately understood the implications. It wasn't malicious, just sloppy translation, but it could have cost his company millions in the long run. "This child has just saved me more money than most executives make in a year," Sheikh Khalid announced to the room, "and she has shown more respect for my language and culture than any Western business partner I've dealt with." The final terms were reached just as the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the conference room in shades of gold and amber. $50 million, structured over 3 years, with provisions that satisfied both parties. Sheikh Khalid signed with a flourish, then did something that made the entire room hold its breath. He stood and bowed formally to Amara. "Shukran, little sister," he said in Arabic. "You have the heart of a true translator, one who builds bridges rather than walls." Amara bowed back, her movement graceful and culturally appropriate. "It is my honor, uncle," she replied, using the respectful form of address for an elder. Sheikh Khalid laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the room. "Marcus Johnson," he said, turning to address the janitor directly. "You have raised a remarkable daughter. I hope you understand what a treasure she is." "I've always known," Marcus replied simply, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. As the contracts were copied and finalized, Sheikh Khalid pulled out his personal checkbook. "For the young translator," he said, writing quickly, "consider this a small investment in your future education." The check was for $10,000. Harrison finally found his voice. "You can't seriously give that much money to a child for a few hours of translation." Sheikh Khalid's eyes hardened. "I pay my translators based on value provided, not age or appearance. This young lady has provided more value today than translators I've paid 10 times as much." He handed the check to Marcus. "For her college fund, I assume?" Marcus's hands shook slightly as he accepted the check. It was more money than he'd see in months of pushing his mop through these halls. "Thank you, sir. And, yes, for her education." As the meeting concluded and participants began to gather their belongings, Isabella approached Marcus and Amara. The CEO, who'd never once acknowledged the janitor's existence in 3 years of him cleaning her office, now stood before him as something approaching an equal. "Mr. Johnson," she began, then paused, seemingly searching for words. "I owe you both an apology. And perhaps something more." "We don't need apologies," Marcus said with quiet dignity. "We just need opportunity." Isabella nodded slowly. "Then let me offer one. Amara clearly has an extraordinary gift. There's a private school, Branson Academy, that specializes in gifted children. They have programs specifically for linguistic development. I sit on their board." "We can't afford," Marcus began. "Full scholarship," Isabella interrupted. "I can arrange it. The school needs students like Amara, students who bring different perspectives and experiences. She'd be doing them a favor by attending." Amara looked up at her father, hope blooming in her eyes. Marcus hesitated, pride warring with pragmatism. He knew what Branson Academy was, a school where the children of senators and CEOs prepared for lives of privilege and power. Could his daughter navigate that world while remaining true to herself? "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course," Isabella replied. She pulled out a business card, writing her personal cell phone number on the back. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands." As the boardroom emptied, Harrison made one last attempt to reassert the old order. "This is highly irregular, Isabella. The board will hear about this." Isabella turned on him with a smile that could have frozen hell. Yes, they will. They'll hear about how you nearly sabotaged a $50 million deal with your prejudice and small-mindedness. They'll hear how an 8-year-old girl had to save the company from your incompetence. Would you like me to include that in my report, Harrison? The older man retreated, defeated. As Marcus and Amara prepared to leave, Sheikh Khalid approached once more. Mr. Johnson, I want you to know something. I've dealt with hundreds of Western companies, and this is the first time I've felt truly respected in a negotiation. Not because of her, he gestured toward Isabella, but because of your daughter. She understood that language is about connection, not just communication. He handed Marcus another card. My personal contact. If she ever wants to study abroad or needs recommendations for university, call me. The Arab world needs more bridge builders like her. That night, as Marcus pushed his cart through the now empty offices, everything looked different. The familiar hallways seemed less like prison corridors and more like pathways to possibility. Amara walked beside him, occasionally helping by emptying small waste baskets, chattering excitedly about the words she'd learned, the concepts she'd translated. "Daddy," she said suddenly. "That lady, Miss Sterling." She was scared. Marcus paused in his mopping. "Scared? She's the CEO, baby. What would she be scared of?" "Being wrong," Amara said with the clarity that only children possess. She was scared that if the deal didn't work, everyone would think she wasn't good enough. Just like how you're scared people think you're not smart because you clean floors. Marcus set down his mop and knelt beside his daughter. "How did you get so wise?" "From you and Mama," she said simply. "Mama always said being smart wasn't about the job you have, but about seeing people for who they really are." Over the following days, the story of what had happened in the boardroom spread through Sterling Industries like wildfire. The janitor's daughter who'd saved the $50 million deal became legend, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy. Some versions had her speaking 10 languages, others had her as a teenage prodigy rather than an 8-year-old child, but all versions carried the same undercurrent of disbelief. How had they all missed such talent, hiding in plain sight? Isabella found herself thinking about the incident more than she'd expected. In her corner office, surrounded by the trappings of success, she realized that she'd built her entire career within walls that had never been challenged. Every achievement, impressive as it might be, had been essentially predetermined by her birthright, the right schools, the right connections, the right skin color. Amara's intervention had shown her how much talent might be invisible to her. How much potential was being wasted because it didn't arrive in the expected packaging. She began to notice Marcus when he cleaned her office. Really notice him. The careful way he worked around her papers without disturbing anything. The quiet efficiency of his movements. The intelligence in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. She wondered what dreams he'd deferred to push that mop. What languages he might have spoken if life had given him different chances. A week after the negotiation, Isabella stayed late specifically to catch Marcus during his shift. She found him in the break room, eating a simple dinner from a thermos while reading a worn Arabic textbook. "You studied the language too," she said. Not a question, but an observation. Marcus looked up, surprised. "A long time ago, before life got complicated. May I?" She gestured to the chair across from him. When he nodded, she sat probably the first executive to ever share a break room table with the janitorial staff. "Tell me about it." "About what you studied." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, assessing her sincerity. "I had a scholarship to Columbia. Middle Eastern languages, with a focus on classical Arabic and modern diplomatic translation. I was going to work for the State Department, maybe the UN. What happened?" "Life," Marcus said simply. "My wife got sick. Medical bills. Choices had to be made." He closed the textbook, gently. "I don't regret it. Taking care of my family, raising Amara that matters more than any degree." Isabella was quiet, processing this. "But you kept studying." "Knowledge doesn't expire," Marcus replied. "And I wanted Amara to see that learning doesn't stop just because formal education does. Though she's surpassed anything I could teach her long ago. She's remarkable. She's her mother's daughter," Marcus said with a soft smile. "Keisha always said Amara would change the world." I just try to make sure the world doesn't change her first. Isabella pulled out the scholarship forms she'd brought. About Branson Academy. It's a different world, Marcus interrupted. Those kids, those families, they're not going to accept a janitor's daughter easily. No. Isabella agreed honestly. They're not. But that's exactly why she needs to be there. To show them what they're missing. To change what acceptance looks like. Marcus studied the forms. And what happens when she comes home talking about ski trips to Aspen and summers in the Hamptons? When she starts feeling ashamed of our apartment, of what I do for a living. Then you remind her of today, Isabella said. When she stood in a room full of millionaires and billionaires and was the only one who could bridge two worlds. That's not something money can buy. They talked for another hour, Isabella learning more about Marcus's interrupted dreams, his wife's death, his struggle to raise a gifted child on a janitor's salary. In return, she shared something she'd never told anyone, her own sense of isolation at the top, the loneliness of success when it felt unearned, the pressure of maintaining perfection when she suspected she was deeply imperfect. Can I ask you something? Marcus said as their conversation wound down. Why do you care? Really? Isabella considered the question. Because today, your 8-year-old daughter showed me that everything I thought I knew about talent, about value, about worth it, was all filtered through assumptions I didn't even know I had. That's terrifying and liberating at the same time. The scholarship to Branson Academy was approved within a week. The school, eager to improve their diversity statistics and intrigued by Amara's linguistic abilities, offered not just tuition but also funds for uniforms, books, and transportation. Marcus swallowed his pride and accepted it all, knowing that his daughter's future was worth more than his discomfort. Amara's first day at Branson was everything Marcus had feared and hoped. The other children, dressed in designer clothes and dropped off in luxury cars, stared at the black girl who arrived on the public bus. But when the language teacher discovered that Amara could not only speak 7 languages, but could explain the grammatical connections between them, the dynamic began to shift. Isabella kept watch from a distance, using her board position to ensure Amara wasn't just admitted, but truly included. She pushed for the school to start a peer tutoring program, where Amara could teach other students languages in exchange for help with the social navigation of elite private school culture. It worked better than expected. Children, it turned out, were less attached to prejudice than their parents. But the real change was in the relationship between Isabella and Marcus. What had started as guilt-driven assistance evolved into something else. Isabella began timing her late nights to coincide with Marcus's shifts, and their break room conversations became a regular occurrence. She learned about his favorite poets, Rumi in translation, Langston Hughes in original. He learned about her love of astronomy, her secret dream of having been an astrophysicist if family expectations hadn't pushed her toward business. We're an unlikely pair of friends, Marcus observed one evening, 3 months after the negotiation that had changed everything. Are we? Isabella asked. Friends? Marcus looked at her steadily. What else would you call 2 people who share their dreams and disappointments over terrible break room coffee? Friends, Isabella agreed, though something in her chest suggested another word might be more accurate. The shift from friendship to something more was gradual, almost imperceptible. It started with Isabella bringing better coffee for their conversations. Then Marcus began leaving small origami figures on her desk cranes and flowers folded from post-it notes during his shifts. Isabella found herself looking forward to Monday nights when Marcus worked her floor, and Marcus found himself checking out books of poetry he thought she might enjoy. The first time their hands touched, reaching for the same coffee mug, they both pulled back as if burned. The second time, when Isabella handed him a book of Mary Oliver poems she'd bought specifically for him, their fingers lingered. The third time, Marcus steadied her when she nearly tripped over his mop bucket, and his hands on her arms felt like both a question and an answer. This is complicated, Isabella said one night, after they'd spent an hour not quite acknowledging what was building between them. Everything worth having is, Marcus replied. I'm your boss. Technically, your boss's boss's boss. You're Isabella, Marcus countered. And I'm Marcus. Everything else is just context. Context matters. Your daughter loves you, Marcus finished. She talks about you constantly. Miss Sterling said this. Miss Sterling suggested that. You've become her hero. I'm nobody's hero, Isabella protested. You're hers. And Marcus paused, gathering courage. You're becoming mine, too. The first kiss happened in the boardroom where they'd first truly seen each other. Isabella had stayed late to prepare for a presentation, and Marcus had come to clean. But instead of cleaning, he'd found her crying the first time he'd ever seen her defenses completely down. The presentation was to defend her diversity initiatives to a hostile board, and the stress of fighting for change while managing resistance was taking its toll. Marcus had simply held her. This woman who commanded millions but couldn't command acceptance for doing the right thing. When she looked up at him, mascara smudged and vulnerability naked on her face, he kissed her. Soft, tentative, a question more than a statement. She answered by pulling him closer, by letting herself be human instead of perfect, by choosing connection over isolation. But nothing in their worlds would make this easy. The first sign of trouble came from Harrison, who'd never forgiven Isabella for the humiliation of the Sheikh Khalid negotiation. He noticed her late nights coinciding with Marcus's shifts, saw the way she smiled when the janitor entered her room. Harrison might have been a bigot, but he wasn't stupid. He began collecting evidence, building a case that the CEO was compromising her position through an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. You need to be careful, Isabella's assistant, Janet, warned her one morning. Harrison's been asking questions about your evening schedules, about why you're here so late on specific nights. Isabella felt the familiar chill of impending corporate warfare. Let him ask. Isabella, I'm saying this as someone who respects you. This could destroy everything you've built. The board won't tolerate a scandal. A scandal? Isabella's voice turned sharp. Two single adults developing feelings for each other is a scandal? Janet's silence spoke volumes about what the scandal actually was. Not the relationship itself, but who the relationship was with. Meanwhile, Marcus faced his own challenges. The other janitors, who'd always seen him as one of them, now viewed him with suspicion. Was he trying to rise above his station? Was he using his daughter's gift to manipulate the CEO? The whispers followed him through his shifts, poisoning relationships he'd built over years. You need to be careful, brother, warned Tony, another janitor who'd become a friend. These rich folks, they don't really see us. You're just a novelty to her, something different. When she gets bored, you don't know her. Marcus defended. I know her type. They slum it for the thrill, then go back to their own kind. But the most painful confrontation came from Amara herself. She'd heard whispers at school, cruel comments from children who'd overheard their parents' gossip. The janitor trying to seduce the CEO. The gold digger using his daughter to get close to money. Daddy, are you dating Miss Sterling because she helped me get into Branson? Amara asked one evening, her young face troubled. Marcus knelt beside his daughter, taking her hands in his. Baby girl, do you really think I'd do that? No, Amara said quickly, then hesitated. But other people do. They say you're using her. Or she's using us to look good. Like we're her charity project. What do you think? Amara considered carefully. I think she looks at you the way Mama used to, and you smile more when she's around. And how does that make you feel? Happy, Amara admitted. But scared too. What if it doesn't work? What if she realizes we don't fit in her world? Marcus pulled his daughter close. Then we'll still be us. You and me against the world, just like always. The crisis came to a head at the company's annual gala, an ostentatious affair held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Isabella had invited Marcus as her guest, a declaration of sorts. He'd rented a tuxedo, feeling both elegant and fraudulent in the expensive fabric. Amara stayed with their neighbor, but not before helping her father with his bow tie, insisting he looked like James Bond, but better. The reaction when they entered together was immediate and visceral. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. The janitor and the CEO, walking in together as if they belonged in the same universe. Isabella felt Marcus tense beside her, saw him beginning to retreat into himself. She made a decision that would either cement her position or destroy it. She took his hand, interlacing their fingers in full view of New York's business elite. Breathe, she whispered. We belong here. You belong here. They made their way through the crowd, Isabella introducing Marcus not as the janitor but as Marcus Johnson, a brilliant linguist and the father of the remarkable young woman who saved our Khalid acquisition. Some people responded with genuine interest, others with barely concealed disdain. Harrison watched from across the room like a predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came during the speeches. Harrison had somehow arranged to speak, and his topic was maintaining corporate standards and professional boundaries. Every word was aimed at Isabella and Marcus, every pause loaded with implication. We must ask ourselves, Harrison intoned, what message we send when we blur the lines between management and staff, between those who lead and those who serve. Sterling Industries has always prided itself on maintaining the highest standards of professionalism. Isabella stood to respond, but Marcus touched her arm gently. May I? He asked. He walked to the microphone with the same dignity he brought to every task, whether mopping floors or wearing a tuxedo. The room held its breath. My name is Marcus Johnson, he began, his voice steady and clear. I'm a janitor at Sterling Industries. I clean your offices, empty your trash, make sure your workspaces are ready for you each morning. I'm also a father, a widower, and someone who once dreamed of being a translator at the United Nations. He paused, looking directly at Harrison. You talk about maintaining standards, about keeping proper boundaries. But I wonder whose standards? Whose boundaries? The same ones that would have prevented my 8-year-old daughter from saving a $50 million deal because she didn't look like what you expected brilliance to look like. The room was absolutely silent now. I've cleaned your offices for 3 years. I've seen your deals, your celebrations, your failures, all from the invisible edges of your world. And what I've learned is that the boundaries you're so concerned about protecting aren't about professionalism. They're about power. About keeping people like me in our place, so people like you don't have to question whether you've earned yours. He found Isabella's eyes in the crowd. Isabella Sterling is the first person in that building to see me as more than a function. She saw potential in my daughter when others saw disruption. She chose merit over bias, courage over convention. If that threatens your standards, then maybe your standards need threatening. Marcus stepped back from the microphone, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then someone started clapping Sheikh Khalid, who'd attended as a guest of honor. Then another person, and another, until half the room was applauding while the other half sat in stone-faced disapproval. Isabella walked to Marcus, took his hand again, and faced the room. The board can accept my resignation on Monday if they choose, but I will not apologize for recognizing brilliance wherever it exists, and I will not apologize for falling in love with a man whose integrity is worth more than all the stock options in this room. The word love hung in the air like a challenge. She'd said it publicly, irrevocably, binding them together in front of witnesses who would never let either of them forget it. Harrison stood, his face purple with rage. This is unacceptable. The board, interrupted a voice from the back, is interested in performance, not prejudice. It was Catherine Walsh, the senior-most board member, a woman who'd fought her own battles against glass ceilings decades ago. Isabella's leadership has increased our stock value by 30%. Her diversity initiatives have opened new markets. And if I recall correctly, Harrison, you nearly cost us $50 million with your small-mindedness. She walked forward, extending her hand to Marcus. Mr. Johnson, I apologize for our colleague's behavior. Sterling Industries should be proud to have you and your daughter associated with us. The gala continued, but the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. Some guests made a point of speaking to Marcus, genuinely interested in his story. Others avoided them entirely, their discomfort palpable. But Isabella and Marcus had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and they faced it together. In the following weeks, the corporate drama played out predictably. Harrison rallied his supporters, calling for Isabella's resignation on grounds of professional misconduct. Isabella's supporters countered with performance metrics and the success of her inclusive leadership. The business press had a field day with the story the CEO and the janitor became headline fodder, with op-eds ranging from romantic support to scathing criticism. But in the eye of this hurricane, something beautiful was happening. Marcus, Isabella, and Amara were becoming a family. Not officially, not yet, but in the small ways that mattered. Isabella helped Amara with her homework, discovering the joy of witnessing a brilliant young mind expand. Marcus cooked dinner for Isabella, introducing her to the comfort of collard greens and cornbread after long corporate battles. Amara played translator, helping them navigate not just languages, but the cultural differences between their worlds. "I don't care about the board," Isabella told Marcus one evening as they sat in his small Bronx apartment, a world away from her Manhattan penthouse. "I care about this. Us." "You say that now," Marcus replied carefully. "But if you lose everything you've worked for, then I'll find new things to work for. Better things. Things that matter because of what they are, not what they represent." Amara looked up from her book. She was reading Hafez in the original Persian now. "Miss Sterling, are you going to marry my daddy?" The adults froze. Then Isabella laughed. A real laugh. Not the calculated one she used in boardrooms. "Would that be okay with you?" Amara considered seriously. "Only if you promise not to make us move. I like our apartment. It feels like home. Then we stay," Isabella said simply. Marcus looked at her in surprise. "You'd live here? In the Bronx? In a 2-bedroom apartment?" "I'd live anywhere with you two," Isabella replied. And meant it. The board meeting that would decide Isabella's fate was scheduled for a Thursday morning. The night before, Marcus found her in the boardroom where everything had started, staring out at the city lights. "Scared?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Not of losing the job. Of losing my nerve. Of backing down. To keep the peace." "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because I know you. The real you, not the CEO performance. You're the woman who recognized my daughter's genius when everyone else saw a disruption. You're the woman who chose love over an easy life. You don't back down from what's right." The next morning, Isabella walked into the board meeting with Marcus beside her. It was unprecedented. A janitor in the boardroom. Not to clean, but to stand as an equal. Amara was at school, but she'd made them promise to tell her everything. Harrison made his case with vindictive precision. Inappropriate relationships. Compromised authority. Damage to the company's reputation. He had photos of Isabella and Marcus together, emails showing changed schedules. A whole dossier of evidence that made their love sound sordid rather than sincere. Isabella listened calmly, then stood to respond. But before she could speak, the door opened and Sheikh Khalid entered, followed by 3 other major international partners. "Forgive the interruption," Sheikh Khalid said smoothly, "but when we heard that Miss Sterling's position was in question, we felt compelled to attend. You see, we don't just invest in companies, we invest in leaders. And Miss Sterling has shown us something remarkable. The courage to see value where others see obstacles." He looked directly at Harrison. "If you force her out because she fell in love with a good man who happens to clean your offices, we will withdraw our investments. All of us. That's..." He paused for effect. "Approximately $300 million. The board's calculation changed instantly. Principles were one thing, but $300 million was something else entirely. Catherine Walsh called for a vote. It wasn't unanimous. Harrison and 2 others voted for Isabella's removal, but the majority voted to retain her as CEO, with the provision that Marcus be transferred to a different department to avoid direct reporting conflicts. "Actually," Isabella said, "I have a different proposal. Marcus shouldn't be a janitor because that's not what he's qualified to do. I propose we create a new position, Director of Linguistic and Cultural Services. Someone to help us navigate international markets with the same insight his daughter brought to the Khalid deal." "That's nepotism," Harrison spat. "No," Catherine Walsh corrected. "Nepotism would be hiring him because of his relationship with Isabella. This is hiring him because he speaks 4 languages and raised a daughter who speaks 7. It's called recognizing talent. The vote was closer this time, but it passed. Marcus Johnson, who'd entered the building as a janitor, would return as a director. It wasn't about the title, or even the salary. It was about recognition, about the validation of worth that had nothing to do with who you loved and everything to do with who you were. 6 months later, the wedding was held not in a grand cathedral or expensive venue, but in the community garden in the Bronx where Marcus had proposed. It was a celebration that brought together two worlds that rarely touched CEOs and janitors, private school parents and public housing residents, Manhattan elite and Bronx everyday. Amara served as both flower girl and translator, switching between English, Spanish, and Arabic as she greeted guests in their preferred languages. She wore a dress that Isabella had let her pick out herself, purple tulle with sparkles, entirely impractical and absolutely perfect. Marcus stood at the makeshift altar in a suit he owned, rather than rented, watching Isabella walk toward him in a simple white dress that cost less than the designer gown her mother had tried to force on her. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was present fully herself, rather than performing a role. Sheikh Khalid officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. "In my culture," he said, "we say that love is the bridge between you and everything. Today, we celebrate two people who have built that bridge, plank by plank, across distances that seemed impossible to span." When Marcus and Isabella exchanged vows, they did so in multiple languages: English for the gathering, Arabic for Sheikh Khalid, Spanish for their neighbors, and finally, whispered French, the language of love that Amara had taught them both. "I promise," Isabella said, "to see you, not your role, or your race or your history, but you. I promise to choose us over easy. I promise to be Amara's mother in all the ways that matter, to honor the woman who gave her life and the man who gave her wings. I promise," Marcus replied, "to love you without apology or explanation. I promise to stand beside you in boardrooms and break rooms, in penthouses and public housing. I promise to teach our children, all of them, that love is the only language that needs no translation." When they kissed, Amara cheered the loudest, her joy infectious enough that even Harrison, who'd come to witness what he was certain would be a disaster, found himself applauding. The reception was a mixture of Dominican merengue and corporate small talk, soul food and sushi, children playing tag between the legs of millionaires. It should have been awkward, this collision of worlds. Instead, it was beautiful, a glimpse of what America could be when it chose connection over division. Catherine Walsh cornered Isabella during the reception. "You know this changes everything, don't you? The first interracial couple to lead a Fortune 500 company together. The scrutiny will be intense." Isabella looked across the garden to where Marcus was teaching Sheikh Khalid's son a card trick, while Amara translated the instructions into Arabic. "Let them scrutinize. We've got nothing to hide. And when the novelty wears off, when you're just another married couple dealing with mundane problems, then we'll be just another married couple dealing with mundane problems. That sounds wonderful." As the sun set over the Bronx, painting the sky in shades of hope, the new family, Marcus, Isabella, and Amara Johnson Sterling, stood together, surrounded by a community that had chosen to celebrate love over convention. They knew the road ahead would be complicated, that every success would be scrutinized and every failure magnified. But they also knew they had something more valuable than money or position. They had each other. And a little girl who could speak 7 languages, but whose favorite word in all of them was family. The story could have ended there, with the wedding, with the triumph of love over prejudice. But life, unlike fairy tales, continues past, happily ever after. 3 years later, Marcus had transformed Sterling Industries' international division, using his linguistic skills and cultural intelligence to open markets in regions the company had never successfully entered. Isabella had become known as the CEO who'd revolutionized corporate culture, proving that inclusive leadership wasn't just morally right but financially brilliant. Amara, now 11, had added 3 more languages to her repertoire and had started teaching linguistics to other gifted children. She'd also become a big sister when Isabella and Marcus welcomed twins, a boy and a girl who would grow up in a world where their mixed heritage was a source of strength rather than confusion. The apartment in the Bronx had become their weekend home, a place to stay grounded. During the week, they lived in a brownstone in Harlem, a compromise between Isabella's Manhattan and Marcus's Bronx. The walls were covered with Amara's language awards, Marcus's recovered university certificates, and Isabella's reimagined business awards, not for profit margins, but for human impact. Harrison had eventually resigned, unable to stomach the new Sterling Industries that valued talent over pedigree. His replacement was a young black woman from Howard University, who'd started as an intern and risen through merit and determination. The company's stock had doubled. Their international partnerships had tripled, and their reputation as a progressive leader in corporate America had become their greatest asset. On the anniversary of that first boardroom encounter, Sheikh Khalid visited New York. Over dinner at Marcus and Isabella's home, where the conversation flowed in 4 languages, and the twins babbled in their own invented tongue, he raised a toast. "To the little girl who spoke truth in my language," he said, nodding to Amara. "To the father who sacrificed everything for his daughter's future. To the mother who chose courage over comfort. And to the proof that sometimes the most important negotiations aren't about money, but about seeing each other's humanity." As they clinked glasses, Amara asked a question that had been bothering her. "Uncle Khalid, that first day, were you really going to walk away from the deal?" The sheikh smiled. "Yes, Habibti, I was. But not just because of the translation errors. I was walking away because I didn't see any heart in that room, any understanding that business is ultimately about human connection. Then you spoke, and everything changed. So I really did save the deal?" "No," Sheikh Khalid corrected gently. "You saved something much more important. You saved us all from the poverty of our assumptions." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the twins were asleep, Marcus and Isabella stood on their brownstone's roof garden, looking out at the city that had tried so hard to keep them apart. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Everything you risked?" Isabella turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd taught her that love was its own form of success. "The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to see you, really see you. You see me now. I do. And you see me." They stood there. 2 people who'd crossed impossible distances to find each other. Who'd built a bridge between worlds that weren't supposed to touch. Below them, New York hummed with the energy of 8 million dreams. But above them, the stars were the same ones that had watched over a janitor pushing his cart through empty offices, a CEO fighting for meaning in her success, and a little girl who knew that languages were just different ways of saying the same human truths. The real transformation wasn't just in Marcus and Isabella's love story, it was in how that story rippled outward, changing everything it touched. Sterling Industries became a case study in inclusive leadership, with business schools sending students to study how love and justice could coexist with profit and growth. Other companies began implementing their own versions of the Amara Protocol, looking for talent in unexpected places, valuing cultural intelligence alongside traditional metrics. Marcus's journey from janitor to director became legendary, but he never forgot where he came from. He instituted a program where Sterling Industries service staff could attend language and business classes on company time, with full pay. 3 other janitors had already transitioned to corporate positions, their hidden talents finally given room to grow. Isabella's story challenged every assumption about what a CEO should be. She proved that vulnerability was compatible with leadership, that love was compatible with success, that choosing happiness over convention was the ultimate power move. Young women in business programs studied her trajectory, learning that authenticity was more valuable than any prescribed path to power. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Amara herself. Growing up, bridging 2 worlds, had taught her that translation was about more than words. It was about helping people understand each other across every kind of divide. She'd already decided she would become a diplomat, but not the traditional kind. She would be a bridge builder, someone who helped enemies find common language, who translated not just words but hopes and fears and dreams. On her 16th birthday, Amara received a letter from Harvard, offering her early admission to study linguistics and international relations. The acceptance came with a note from the admissions committee. "We've been waiting for you since we heard about the 8-year-old who saved a $50 million deal. But we're not accepting you because of what you did then. We're accepting you because of who you've become, someone who understands that the most important translations happen between hearts." That evening, as the family celebrated around their dinner table, Marcus helping the twins with their homework, Isabella planning her next board battle for social justice, Amara teaching everyone a phrase in Swahili she'd learned that day, they embodied something beautiful and radical and essentially American: the possibility of transformation, the power of love to cross any boundary, the truth that talent and worth and beauty exist everywhere, waiting only for eyes brave enough to see. The janitor's daughter, who spoke 7 languages, had indeed shocked the CEO in that $50 million negotiation. But the real shock was how love had grown from that moment of recognition. Love between Marcus and Isabella, yes, but also love for what America could be when it chose bridges over walls, when it recognized that every person mopping floors or cleaning offices might be carrying dreams as vast as any CEO's, when it understood that the greatest negotiations weren't about money but about making space for each other's full humanity. Their story became a testament to the idea that love wasn't blind to difference. It saw difference clearly and chose to celebrate rather than fear it. In boardrooms and break rooms, in private schools and public housing, in 7 languages and counting, the Johnson-Sterling family continued to translate the only message that really mattered. Every person deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for exactly who they are. And in the end, that little girl's voice, clear and confident and unafraid, had spoken a truth that no translation could improve upon. I can help. Those 3 words had changed everything, proving that sometimes the most powerful language is simply the courage to speak up, to stand up, to show up as yourself in a world that might not be ready for you, but needs you desperately. The city lights twinkled below as the family prepared for bed, each light representing another story, another dream, another possibility for connection across difference. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, new translations. But tonight, in a brownstone in Harlem, where a janitor's wisdom was valued as highly as a CEO's strategy, where children grew up speaking languages of love and justice in equal measure, where the American dream had been redefined to include everyone willing to work for it tonight, they were home. And that, perhaps, was the greatest translation of all. Turning strangers into family, suspicion into trust, prejudice into possibility. The janitor's daughter had done more than speak 7 languages. She had spoken the 8th, most important language, the language of hope, and in speaking it, she had taught everyone listening that the most important negotiations in life aren't about what we can get, but about what we can give. Understanding, respect, and the revolutionary act of seeing each other clearly and choosing to love anyway.